Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's very exciting episode of Rose to the Ceilings podcast. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Kate. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on.
Yeah, Kate, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, gosh, there's so much to tell. But I will say that I am the CEO and founder of One Girl Revolution. And One Girl Revolution really sparked out of my own background and my own interests. So, my background's in PR and media. And I started realizing and recognizing how often women's voices and their stories weren't being told by the media, weren't being covered. And so, almost 5 years ago, I decided to start One Girl Revolution, and it started as a podcast and then has grown into documentaries. And now we are a multimedia enterprise that highlights the stories of everyday women and girls that are changing the world through their lives.
That is
That's
so amazing
amazing.
to hear because our podcast basically aims to do the exact same thing. So when we found out about One Girl Revolution and we read the little blurbs about it, about how you're trying to showcase women who have done amazing things in their lives, we're like, whoa, that is so identical to what our goal was. So it is so amazing to have you on because this is something that we're also super passionate about, and we cannot wait to hear more about what you're doing.
Yeah, there's so much synergy between what you're doing and what I'm doing at One Girl. And so, like I said, I'm so honored to be on.
Mhm. I had a question that so you mentioned that One Girl is a multimedia platform now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what entails in multi, like aside from documentaries and stuff, is there other components in there?
Yeah. So, like I said, it started as a podcast. And I at first thought if I just did 10 episodes, because the majority of podcasts, they only have 7 episodes. So it's a lot of work, as you both know, to host a podcast and edit it and all the different facets that go into actually doing a podcast and then releasing it. So I thought if I did 10 episodes, 10 different stories, 10 unique stories, that would make an impact, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, that's more than the majority of podcasts, more than the 7 episodes. And we just hit 200 episodes. So,
Oh,
which is
wow.
crazy. So the podcast has continued where we highlight every single week, we highlight a different story of a woman or girl, everyone from 5-year-old little Lily who makes coloring books for children in hospitals
Oh.
up
Huh?
to Jenny DePaul, who's in New Jersey. And every night she's a stay at home mom. She puts her kids to bed and then goes out to the streets of New York City to serve those experiencing homelessness, up to Miss Catherine, who, in an effort to combat maternal and infant mortality rates within the African American community, she started an organization called Sister Friends, where they build community around new moms and teach them how to take care of their babies and teach them how to take care of themselves and build community around them. So all these different stories. So it started as a podcast, and then I always had a vision for telling stories visually. I'm a very
Mm.
visual person.
Hmm.
I'm a visual learner. And I stumbled upon a story of a professor that taught a storytelling class within Cook County Jail. And a friend of mine had said, "Hey, if you ever I love what you're doing with the podcast, but if you ever find a story that you feel like needs to be told on film, let me know." And he runs a studio out of Chicago called Behold. And he said, "Look, like if it makes sense, maybe we could do a some sort of collaboration." I called him, told him this story. He started laughing. He was like, "There's no way you're going to get a film crew into. First of all, they're not going to let you into Cook County Jail. Secondarily, they're not going to let a film crew in." And it took me 9 months, but I finally got
Wow.
clearance to take a film crew into Cook County Jail, and we interviewed the women there, not about what they did to end up in Cook County Jail, but about who they are as people, who they are
Mm.
as human beings, what their hopes and dreams are, what their hopes and dreams were as little kids. And so that turned into our Emmy nominated now, which is amazing. So we were nominated for an Emmy for it. Documentary called "The Girl Inside," which is available on YouTube. And so the podcast turned into the podcast and documentaries, and then we started utilizing social media. So utilizing Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok,
Mhm.
LinkedIn, different ways that we could
Hmm.
reach out to people. And then it just continues to grow and evolve. And we're also really, like I said, my background's in PR and media. So we're really utilizing that arm as well. So pitching any of the stories that we cover on the podcast or in our documentaries, pitching those out to the media as well, because I think a lot of times there are amazing stories out there and we just don't know about them, or the media doesn't know about them. And so the power of us just using our voices and using our time and talents to pitch those stories out. And so that's kind of the newer arm of One Girl Revolution, that we're pitching stories out to the media.
I really loved The Girl Inside.
Oh,
It was very, very powerful, and I love seeing like each individual woman's story, and I think that's so important because sometimes we're grouped into cliques.
That is
So
true.
it's so important to see each individual person. And I remember you saying that you started 5 years ago and you already came this far. That is amazing to me. And I am curious if it was hard for you to find that type of support at the beginning.
Uh, yeah, and that's a great question. I think that it's always hard to find support, right? Like I think that if you have a dream, it can feel really lonely. It can feel really lonely. I'm sure that you both have had moments with your podcast. It can be really lonely when you have a vision for something and other people don't see it. I still have really dear friends that refer to One Girl Revolution as, oh, it's a cute project, or like your little project or whatever. And it's like, no, we won an Emmy. We were nominated. We didn't win, but we were nominated for an Emmy award. Like, seriously, it's not a cute project. It's not some little
Mhm.
thing.
Hmm.
It's a big thing. And so I think we all can experience that. And it's really hard when you have a dream and you have a vision for something. It can feel very isolating, but I think there's also so much beauty. And I think the three of us sitting together tonight is such an example of that. Is you will find your people. You will find your people that
Hmm.
stumble upon what you're doing or see what you're doing, and maybe they don't even say something. Maybe they're just kind of a silent supporter of what you're doing. They're the ones that listen to the podcast, they're the ones that watch your documentaries, they're the ones that follow every single email that you send out. And I'm so grateful for those people. So it's definitely been hard, it's been difficult, and I think every year has kind of been a new challenge, a new
Hmm.
difficulty. But I'm just, so many amazing things have happened, and I think it also goes to show that if you have a vision for something, if you have a
Hmm.
dream, that if you sometimes literally put one foot in front of the other. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I had no idea what a podcast, like how to do a podcast. I just put one foot in front of the other and figured it out.
Hmm.
And that the road that I've traveled has been full of difficulties, but it's also been full of blessings and things that I am just so grateful for.
Hmm. I really liked how you mentioned how you're talking about how like over these 200 plus episodes, every single person has a different story. Like you mentioned, like you had this 5-year-old girl to like stay at home moms, and I think that's really important to recognize too. That like we're not just women as like of one person. We're all like different stories. So I really want to ask like what your story is. Like what inspired you to start bringing these things to light.
Oh, that's such a beautiful. Thank you for asking that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about. I oftentimes get asked like, who is one story that really sticks out to you, or what's your favorite story, or what's one that just like changed your life? And I will say that every single woman that I've encountered through One Girl Revolution, through the podcast, through the documentaries, has changed my life. And when I started One Girl Revolution, I just had experienced so often in the media. I'd worked in Washington D.C. for many years and started recognizing how often women's stories are politicized, they're very divisive. When the media is covering it, it's got to be like an us versus them mentality, especially when it comes to women. And so that really frustrated me because I know so many amazing women and their stories aren't political. They're just seeing a need and they're doing something. They're like, oh, why do you do what you do? Oh, well, I just saw a need and I just did it. Like, did it in their
Mm-hmm.
little ways. Sometimes they founded organizations, or sometimes they just, like little Lily that I mentioned, who was 5 years old. Now she's, I think, 12, which is amazing. But I interviewed her when she was 5. And here's this little kid that just saw a need, and she didn't found an organization. She didn't, jump through all the hoops to start something big, but she made such an impact. And so, um, when I started One Girl Revolution, it really was just a space for women to share women and girls to share their authentic stories. And what I realized, to kind of answer your question, is to kind of bring it all the way back to my own story. So I started realizing probably a year or two ago that I had my own story. I had my own One Girl Revolution story, and I had my own story about why I do what I do, why I care so deeply about these stories. And it goes all the way back to my childhood. When I was a little girl, I had terrible eczema. I was born, and even as a baby, all my little baby pictures, I have bright red cheeks and really bad rash. For people that don't know, eczema is just dry skin, but it can manifest itself as like a bright red rash. So all of my baby pictures, I had rash all over my skin, and then I was 3 or 4 years old and became this very opinionated little kid. I would itch my hair out because I had terrible eczema on my head, so I'd itch my hair out. And people oftentimes thought I was going through chemo treatment, thought I was a little kid with cancer. And Minnie Mouse at Disney World one time thought that I was a Make-A-Wish Foundation little kid. So all these like beautiful pictures of me as a 2-year-old with like Minnie holding me and like hugging me. And my mom was like, she thought you had cancer. Like she thought you were a Make-A-Wish Foundation baby. So that's what I was going through. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, right? Like terrible eczema. It was so painful. My clothes would stick to me as a little kid. My mom would like have to figure out creative ways to peel my clothes off and put like new clothes on. And so I suffered greatly as a little kid. I have a really rare immune deficiency called Job syndrome, which Job in the Old Testament suffered greatly. So they named it after Job. But simultaneously, I was this very opinionated, happy little go-lucky kid. Had a lot of opinions. When I was 4 years old, my parents would always say that I was either going to be the dictator of a small nation or the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So I was that was my personality. I had a lot to say. And I start going to school, and like so many children, I was this feisty, happy, opinionated little kid. And I little by little started becoming this like wilting little flower. So when I was 6 or 7 years old, I simply stopped talking in class. I wouldn't raise my hand. Here I'm this feisty little kid, and I would walk into school, and then all of a sudden became this very insular, don't look at me, like didn't want to draw attention to myself, anything, little kid. And thankfully I had parents that were very clued into what was going on in my life. And they realized something when I would go to school, like something wasn't adding up, something was wrong. And they ended up figuring out that I was being bullied at school. So kids were, which is so many people's story, right? Like we all have our thing where like kids made fun of us, or our peers made fun of us, or would harass us about things. And so I stopped talking in class because I didn't want to draw attention to my rash, because it was like, oh, look at that girl, she has rash, or like she's not invited to our birthday parties because she looks different, or this, that, or the other thing. Kids can be so cruel. And thankfully, my parents really like dug in. They were like, what can we do to support Kate and like make her feel happy again? And my mom loved the movie Dumbo. And if you've seen Dumbo, you know how Dumbo had this magic feather, right? Like he always could fly. He always could fly, but he needed to believe he could. And it was through like, oh, if you held the magic feather, this quote unquote magic feather, that he could fly. And so my mom was like, Kate needs a magic feather. So I started doing Irish dancing, which people often like will know about river dance. But it was before the times of river dance. And I started doing Irish dancing, and that became my magic feather. I found my confidence again. I found my courage again as a little kid. I came back to being this feisty, opinionated little kid, and the person that I still am today. But what I realized over the past year and a half is that's where it all stemmed from. That's where One Girl Revolution stemmed from, because I know what it feels like to be ignored. I know what it feels like to be silenced. I know what it feels like to be marginalized and forgotten about. And we all can relate to that. We all have those moments in our life. And so that's really the heart of One Girl Revolution. And I'm kind of happy that I started it in the way that I did, where I didn't really I knew that I cared about women's stories, but now I realize I know what it felt like, what it feels like. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do today.
That's such an amazing story. It makes everything you mentioned even more emotional because now you can definitely see there's like a personal touch to it because
Such a
you can,
passion.
yeah, you can definitely tell when somebody is more empathetic towards certain things because of things they've experienced in their own life. So you can definitely see that here, and I think that's just such an amazing thing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sure that you both have those stories, right? Like we all have those stories about why do you care about the things that you care about, right? And those stories matter. That's what One Girl Revolution is all about, is like, why do you, and a question that I've started asking a lot of the guests that we have on the podcast is, if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do, what would you say that root is? And
Mm.
all of us have
That's a great
those
question.
stories are driving forces, right? And sometimes you just have to have those moments of pause where you can reflect on it. And I finally had those moments of pause where I was like, oh my gosh, like this is where it stemmed. It stemmed from when I was 6 years old, you know?
It's like a little origin story moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. We all have
The
them.
superhero origin.
It's
Yeah, we all have
basically as
them.
being a superhero at this point.
We
Well,
all have them. We all are, you know?
Mhm.
I wanted to ask, since this is clearly like relating to women's stories, a passion of yours, how does that work with balancing the passion side of it, but also kind of more like working side of it, where you do have to be producing these documentaries, recording these podcasts? How do you make sure you don't burn yourself out from that passion?
That is a amazing question, because I think that when you're passionate about something, it can be very difficult to draw boundaries where you're like, okay, I am so passionate about, and especially because I'm dealing with so many human stories and so many people that I feel so connected to them and so passionate about what they're doing that I'm like, okay, I need to do more. I need to do everything to support them. And the reality is I'm just one girl, like I'm one woman. And I always say that I'm the one girl behind One Girl Revolution. So if anybody ever wants to get in touch with me, I'm like, just message me on Instagram, because it's like I'm the one girl that answers everything. And so I think it's knowing your own boundaries and knowing what you can handle. I work really hard and I care so deeply about everything that I do. But also saying sometimes I can't do it this week, you know, and being okay with that. I think consistency is key. Consistency is the reason that One Girl has grown the way that it has, that I every single week have released episodes. But there have been times in my life where I've gone through really difficult things or just had a rough week. And I was like, you know what? I had a terrible day. I just can't do it today. Like I can't go through all the motions that I need to write the content, to edit, to record, you know, an intro. Like I just don't feel in the mood. And so giving myself grace in those moments to say, I can't do everything. It would be so different if I was running One Girl Revolution as, you know, a 30-person team, right? Like,
Mhm.
okay, then you have more support if you need to take a mental health day or you need to take a break. You have more people that can carry that load. But when you're just the one person, you have to give yourself grace and say, you know what? The world's not going to stop. I think there's humility in that too. And that's one thing that I'm constantly working on, is humility is so critical in this world. And I think it's hugely lacking, where we have to say, you know what? I can't always be Xena, the warrior princess. I can't always save everyone. And humility is a beautiful thing to say, you know what? I need to take a step back. I need to take care of myself. I'm not going to post on social media today, and that's going to be okay. The world's going to continue. I can come back next week. The audience will still be there. And if you're onto something, if you're really onto something, that audience will always be there and it'll continue to grow, even if you are not totally present, you know, even if you take a step back.
Yeah, I think having that level of self-care and almost contentness with yourself before your project, that's so important. I'm so happy that you said that.
Yes.
Because I definitely know that when you really love something, it kind of feels like the world revolves around that. That's the only thing that matters in the world. So in a case like that, I hope that I can start doing what you've mentioned, where it's kind of like step back, realizing like the world does not actually revolve around this. The world will keep spinning. You'll be fine. So yeah, thank you for including that.
Yeah. Well, we all have families, right? We all have families. We have hobbies. We have things that outside of podcasts, outside of the things that we're doing, outside of our jobs, that like, whether it's things that need to be taken care of, we have pets, we have, you list all the things, and it's like, how do I even keep up with all the things that I have on my plate? But really recognizing that and saying, you know what, I will continue tomorrow. I'm going to take a rest and I'm going to watch some chick flick or whatever you do to like decompress. I know myself, I'm like, sometimes I just need to like, just take a step back and watch some silly show. Or I love Shark Tank for that reason. It's
Oh,
like,
we love Shark Tank.
I love somebody else being on the hot seat. It's like, it's just, I don't know. It just like helps me relax, even though I'm like on edge because I'm like wondering what the sharks are going to do. But knowing what that thing is, like, how do you give yourself a break and a reprieve? And I'll also say, like, from what I'm doing, it's so creative, and creative things, and even what you're both doing, like creative projects are that, like, it takes it's a massive project that it takes bandwidth, a certain type of brain space where you have to actually just like create the space where you can sit with something. And I've had so many times where I have an idea for something and I just carry it with me for days and weeks and months. And I just haven't given myself the space to sit down with it and say, okay, is this actually how I'm going to do it? Or are there intricacies to it? Or how do I want to do it? Or, is it a documentary? Is it a podcast? Is it a series? Is it a visual? Like, is it a photo, some sort of photo campaign? And so with creative projects or creative campaigns, you need to create this space too, where you can just like sometimes just sit and be and not be thinking about all the creative stuff. So then you have the brain space to actually go into the depths of some sort of new creative project too. It's so important to create that space.
Yeah, I think on the opposite end from what we're talking about with the burnout because there's almost too much passion or setting that boundary, there are people who are struggling to take that first step, to start that project, tell that story, or even just get their voice out there. So I was wondering if you had any advice to young girls who feel like they have a story to tell but aren't sure the best way to get their story out there.
Yeah, I would say we all have a story, right? We all have a story to tell, and stories have the power to change the world. It can be difficult when you're starting something or you want to start something and you have no idea where to start. And from my experience, it's just literally putting one foot in front of the other, doing what you already know. So if you already have an Instagram, start there. If you already have a TikTok, start there. If you're on Twitter, if you have a blog, maybe you have none of those things. So that's also another fun spot where it's like, pick your medium. And I think from my perspective, Instagram is a great spot because you can take a photo of something. If you're a creative person, you can take a photo and put a word or not even anything. And people can still learn, like you can still tell a story through a photo. And so from my perspective, I think Instagram is a great outlet for that. If you're more into videos, of course, YouTube or TikTok can be fun places. I'm like starting to dip my toe into TikTok and still don't really understand it and wish I did. But even people on TikTok, they've told stories through dance, right? They found a song that moved them and they used someone else's words, someone else's lyrics, someone else's music composition to tell a story. And so sometimes that's it. Maybe you don't have your voice or you don't know what your voice is or you don't know what your story is. Use someone else's. If there's a song or a lyric that touches your heart, post that either on TikTok or post a lyric on Instagram with a photo that you took, or maybe even a photo of yourself if you want to share that, if it really like strikes a chord. And then start small. I'm not a writer, but I've written many articles. I've written a book. I've written a lot of content for One Girl with 200 episodes, and I've written all of the content for each of the episodes. I'm not a writer. I don't thrive in a writing environment. I don't love writing. I actually despise it, but I do it because it's one outlet, one way to tell a story. And so sometimes we have to do things that we don't like in order to tell a story. But I'm not even saying that you have to start there. Start somewhere where you're really comfortable. And it's like, if music is your thing, choose that lyric, post it on Instagram, and just start with what you're comfortable with. And I promise you, it'll take a life of its own. Like, it'll take on a life of its own. And that's exactly what One Girl did. I started as an Instagram and a Facebook page, and then a podcast, and then a YouTube page, and now a TikTok. And, it's just taken on a life of its own. And I can't wait to see where we go from here.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely, I think, really good advice, because sometimes people think like, oh, if I want to start this project, I have to be on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, vlogging, writing. I have to do all of that at once, or else this project's going to fail. So I really like the idea of just one foot at a time, because that definitely helps you kind of just get yourself out there enough to be able to start the project.
Yeah, and maybe also I'm thinking too, I have a journal, like just a journal that I keep with me, and I learned this from Sarah Blakely. So people that are listening, if anybody's familiar with Spanx, Sarah Blakely is the founder of Spanx, and I just find her to be such an inspiring woman and such an inspiring business owner. But she talked about how before she started her business, she just always kept a notebook with her. And she would write down ideas, she would write down quotes, she would write down she would just use it for her grocery list, like whatever was on her mind, she would use it for. And now here she is, this thriving $1 billion business. And she still has all the notebooks from when she started. And so also,
Wow.
like, if your thing is not digital media, if your thing is not to be online, start there. Start with a piece of paper and a pen and write down a word or a poem or a lyric or a quote that inspires you. We can all start wherever we're comfortable, and you never know where that will go, and you can always turn back to it. Like, and I have all kinds of journals now because I had read that about her, and so those are always things that I can revisit for social media or for the podcast or for different things that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. So there really is something for everyone.
Yeah, truly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you so much for meeting with us today. I feel like we learned a lot from that. Yeah.
There's so much our audience can take away too. Before we do end, is there anything you want to shout out? Any last thing you want to promote?
Well, I want to say thank you so much for everything that you both are doing, and thank you for creating this space for women's voices to be heard. And I'm so grateful and honored to be on, and I can't wait to continue to see where you both go from here. And for all of your listeners, I would just say recognize that you have a story. I always say that we are as unique as our fingerprints, which is true. If you know anything about your fingerprints, if you don't know, you should look it up. But there is no one who has the same fingerprints as you do, and there will never be anyone. We are so unique. And there's an imprint that we each can leave on this world. There's an imprint that I believe that we are each called to leave on this world. And so if there are moments where you feel like you're alone or you're isolated or you don't matter, look at your fingerprint and be reminded that you are here for a reason. You are here for a purpose, and your purpose is so unique. And there's an imprint that only you can leave on this world. And so I'd encourage everybody who's listening to own that, embrace that, and do that every single day. And it's the little things, right? You don't have to start some big organization. And that's what I love so much. And that's what I've learned so much through One Girl Revolution is a lot of the women that I interview, they just did the little thing. They put one foot in front of the other and said, you know what? I don't know how to start a nonprofit organization, but I know how to make lasagna. I'm going to make lasagna for my neighbor, or I know how to handwrite cards. I'm going to write cards for seniors living in my community or my neighbors who don't have anyone who's visiting them. Like, just the little things that we do every single day can have a massive impact, and they can have a ripple effect. And so I just encourage all of your listeners to recognize that. And then the last thing that I'll end on is I hope that everyone who is listening, that they check out the One Girl Revolution podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, wherever people listen to podcasts. So check it out, subscribe. If you're ever having a bad day, it's the best place to just find inspiration. And check out the documentaries too. Both of our documentaries, The Girl Inside and In Tandem, are on YouTube. And people can obviously go to our website at onegirlrevolution.com. So the number onegirlrevolution.com, and they can find all of our podcast episodes, our videos, and social media and all that. So
yeah, we'll definitely be checking
Thank you
out
so
our stuff.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.